Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Data Leaders Unscripted, the podcast where we dive into real world journeys and insights of data leaders. I'm your host, Marvin, and today I'm honored to welcome Martin Stoa to the show. Martin, your career trajectory is truly remarkable. 3 decades at Hilton, a global hospitality icon, where you moved from pioneering revenue management to leading data strategy and data governance. By the way, Martin, I think that we met back in 2011, when you were still working out of the Memphis office at that time in the revenue management practice. But while you were at Hilton, you both witnessed and you drove massive data transformations, and now you're taking a brand new bold step. You're launching your own consultancy, Aviaticus. And Martin, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Marvin. This is real pleasure to be here. And this one feels especially meaningful, not just because your podcast is such a valuable platform, but because of our really long-standing partnership built on trust and collaboration and a shared success. And I'm excited for this conversation and eager to contribute to your mission here.
Thank you, Martin. So before we dive in, why don't we just go with an easy layup? Let's start with something a little bit lighter. Where does the name come from?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I get asked it quite a lot. A few years ago, I became a pilot, and aviation became more than just a passion. It really shaped the way I think and approach business. The mindset required in aviation, it's a discipline, it's a strategic planning, it's adaptability, is directly applicable to leadership and problem solving in data and analytics and other areas. And just like flying, success in business starts with a well thought out strategy. Every flight begins with meticulous preparation, analyzing the weather conditions, mapping out the flight path, and planning for contingencies. A good pilot is always ahead of the plane, anticipating risks, adapting to changing conditions, and making data-driven decisions in real time. And perhaps most importantly, flying teaches you to see the bigger picture while staying still laser focused on relevant details, because both are essential for a smooth and successful landing. That's the philosophy at the core of Aviaticus.
Martin, I just hope that that your flying isn't as bumpy as some of our clients' strategy and planning, like you were talking about. But in more serious note, transitioning from such a long, impactful career at Hilton to now founding Aviaticus represents a big shift. Now, I recently read an article that you wrote on LinkedIn where you framed this as the Great Reset. So this transition, this shift is what you called the Great Reset. And so to really understand the magnitude of this change, let's dive deeper into that specific turning point of your career. Beyond feeling of unease, which is what you described in your article, what were some of the specific challenges that you were facing that made you feel like it's time for change?
Yeah, and I'll get a little bit vulnerable here, which I think is really important at this point. Last year was particularly challenging for me. I spent a lot of time working on myself, and the article you mentioned felt like a really defining milestone in my rediscovery. So for nearly 3 decades, I think you mentioned that my loyalty to Hilton was unwavering. I truly believed my journey with the company will continue almost indefinitely. But last year, something shifted. I began noticing subtle yet undeniable changes in myself. My ability to develop ideas and turn them into action wasn't as sharp. There was sort of a slight delay, something unfamiliar and frankly unsettling. So, and at the same time, I saw that this shift wasn't just personal, it was affecting my team. They were no longer in getting the best version of me. And the impact that I once had within the organization seemed to be But perhaps even more significantly, I started sensing a little bit of a disconnect in some of the critical decisions that have been made. Part of it may have been my tendency to take usually a holistic approach, always considering the long-term implications rather than just addressing immediate situation. But that often meant I saw things different, both from a technology and process perspective. And while I had strong convictions, I didn't always feel like, the confidence to push them forward assertively enough. So I think that combination of factors made me question whether I was still in the right place to create the impact I always wanted. I always believed in tracking so-called that ripple effect of my work, understanding what I do, how it contributes to the bigger picture. But when I looked around, I wasn't sure that connection was still there. And I think that realization hit hard. It forced me to ask those difficult questions. Like, was it time for change?
Martin, you've already been more than vulnerable in everything that you just shared with us, but I think that it's important to go a little bit further, and I'm going to push you if you don't mind. You discuss not only now, but also in your article that you were working with therapists and business coaches. Um, I think it's incredible that you're vocal about that because we all should be vulnerable, which is a sign of authenticity. But I found it so uplifting to hear your vulnerability that I thought it might actually be really good for the readers to just read an excerpt from your article. So in your LinkedIn article in the section called Deep Dive into Rediscovery and Reinvention, I'm just going to read directly from your article where you say, honestly, I couldn't believe I was even considering leaving Hilton. The idea felt almost surreal that thought took root. I needed to distance should truly understand what was happening. I engaged a therapist. I thought the advice of professional business coach, and I embarked on what many called soul searching, though in reality, it felt more like an excavation. Could you share a little bit more about what that involved specifically with the therapists and the business coaches?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. So maybe a little bit of a random order, but first, simply putting things on paper, getting the thoughts out of my head was a game changer. I think we hear nowadays, put things in writing, put it on a piece of paper. And I think it is a proven approach, but I really never fully realized its value. Act of writing things down created clarity for me and allowed me to start seeing patterns and themes that I hadn't noticed before. Uh, Second, I would say I started thinking about this journey through the analogy of a computer. You can restore a system to its factory settings, but even then, you are still either a Mac or a PC. And that realization led me to question my own operating system. It was no longer just about Martin, the business leader. It became about Martin, the person. And opening up my source code was probably the most difficult part of this process. But it was also probably the most revealing. It forced me to take an unfiltered, unbiased look at myself, my decisions, my mistakes, the opportunities I had missed, not just in my career, but also as a husband and father. One of the most powerful realization came from confronting how we tend to justify our past decisions. When I look back at the choices that weren't our best, we naturally try to explain them in a way that makes us feel at peace with ourselves, obviously. But through this process, I learned to strip away that internal justification piece. And instead of rationalizing my past actions, I could see them for what they truly were, without filters. And that's where the real value lies. When you remove those justifications, you are left with a raw, unvarnished truth. From there, you can start the rebuilding process from the ground up, using those insights to shape your future decisions with greater clarity and awareness. And it helps you see dimensions of decision making you might have previously completely ignored. Ultimately, they're leading to more solid, well-rounded choices. The business coach, as you mentioned, it can help you refine your strength, identify opportunities, and sharpen your professional presence. Therapist, on the other hand, guides you through the intricate maze of your personality and helping you to discover the doors that should be open. But ultimately, and again, the hardest part, the act of reaching for the handle, opening those doors, and being ready to face whatever is on the other side, that part is entirely on you.
That's just such incredible nuggets of, I mean, quite frankly, not information, but just wisdom. I think, that's probably the definition of wisdom, where you not only know the information, but you're able to apply it and interpret it within the context of your life. There's so much to unpack with what you just said, but I want to make sure that there's at least three things that we touch on. I think that at some point in that journey, it sounds like there was some mechanism of self-doubt, or maybe where your self-confidence came into question. I want to talk about the writing aspect, because one of the things that I found more on the amusing side was, I was actually thinking to myself, why is it that we need to write things down? Why is it that we need to speak to ourselves, right? So, for example, you might be having doubts in your mind, but then you actually end up speaking them out loud. And what I learned is, apparently our thoughts, that they say, are very unstructured, which you and I can appreciate that. We can geek out on the fact that there's structured and unstructured data. And so by us writing things down, or speaking them out loud, we begin to provide structure for those ideas that are up here, in order to kind of manifest them and ultimately see them all the way through. So I thought that was kind of interesting. The other thing that I wanted to touch on was this idea where you mentioned a dip in self-confidence, which is a quite surprising emotion for someone such as yourself, with such a successful career, 30 years at Hilton. Now, self-doubt during major transitions is something that I experience. I'm sure many leaders face, even if we don't always voice it. So I'd love to understand a little bit about what that was like for you. Can you walk us through that moment of where your self-confidence took a dip, and maybe where you had a little bit of self-doubt?
Yeah, certainly. And really, another great question. I think self doubt is something many leaders experience, as you mentioned, but rarely talk about. And for me, it stemmed from, I think, from two key areas. Um, in the first, I started feeling that sort of my strategic perspective, ones that took a long-term holistic approach, were becoming sort of less relevant in an environment that was more focused on immediate opportunities. I've always believed in looking beyond short-term gains and to ensure sustainability, scalable success, but I sometimes question whether this approach still fits within the evolving priorities around. Was I focusing on the right things? Was my perspective still valuable? Second, I found myself in a room where deep technical expertise was the dominant currency. Like, and despite my strong business background and reasonable solid technology awareness, I sometimes felt like I wasn't technical enough when I engaging with the hardcore technologies. And even though I could connect the dots between the business needs and the technical execution, there were moments where I wondered, am I bringing enough depth to these discussions? Am I keeping up with at the level I should be? So, what helps me regain confidence is recognizing that leadership isn't only about knowing every technical detail. It's about bringing the right perspectives to it. I reframe my thinking to focus on the unique value that I bring. The ability to bridge the gap between business, strategy, and technology, to challenge conventional thinking, and to drive meaningful outcomes. Instead of trying to out-tech technologies, I'm leaning into my strength, connecting insights, anticipating long-term impact, and making complex concepts actionable. And I think that shift in mindset is pivotal. And ultimately, stepping away from an environment where I felt misaligned helped me rebuild that confidence because I can really find success on my own terms.
That's an interesting perspective. I mean, at the end of the day, we are what we think we are. I can't remember what book it was. Maybe it was Rich Dad Poor Dad. Or there are examples of how parents talk to their children when they say things like, "Oh, you don't deserve that toy," or whatever it may be. And it turns out that children ultimately begin programming their minds with having a not deserving mentality. Not that that directly applies to this, but I think it very much connects in the sense of you shifted that mentality, and then when you did that, that new shift in mentality and that new belief drove you to ultimately manifest that belief that you had created. Now in this transition, Martin, I want to change and gears a little bit because you talked about a stepping stone, and so the Hilton project sounds to me like it was an important stepping stone connecting your past to your future. Can for those of you, for those of us who hadn't read the article, can you tell us about how that opportunity with the Hilton project came about, and how it impacted your decision to launch your own firm?
Yeah, absolutely. This, as you said, this was very important, kind of a stepping stone out of this great research. So the content strategy or content space, content management space is incredibly broad and complex with the variety of different channels and personalization ambitions and artificial intelligence. And, it contains multiple different pieces from game, LAMDA models, fancy abbreviations. Um, while I had always been sort of deeply involved in one part of the content, which is the product information management or PIM abbreviation, I knew it was only a piece of this larger puzzle. So at Hilton, we had long recognized that the property information, product information management needs significant improvements, if not complete refactoring. There were also smaller initiatives like taxonomy management that were well intended, but not really fully recognized for being critical for also other capabilities. Ultimately, these projects sort of stalled or were deprioritized because no one was really looking at the entire landscape holistically or crafting a unified, compelling strategy to move forward. And I saw that as a great opportunity. And I raised my hand. So I shared several of my initial perspectives, trying to frame the challenge in a way that connected the dots across different functions. That, I believe, was the key trigger for being entrusted with leading this effort. Now, from the first day on the project, I felt a distinct shift. It was a completely different experience compared to my previous roles. I wasn't just executing within an existing frame, I was shaping the direction. And even though I didn't have every detail figured out, I knew exactly what I was doing. To anchor my thinking, I created a visual representation of what I envisioned the Hilton strategy should be 3-5 years from now. Not just incremental improvements, but an ambitious, forward-looking model that could and will position Hilton as the leader in content management space. From that point on, the process felt like digging a kind of a tunnel from both sides. On one end, I worked from the current state, identifying gaps and constraints. On the other, I started from the future vision, broke it down into tangible actionable stacks. The challenge was ensuring that these two perspectives, the practical execution with this ambitious vision, met in the middle. And having that long-term vision as a guide was invaluable. It kept me from getting lost in the complexities and helped me maintain a clear sense of purpose. So this experience was really a defining moment, validated that my ability to think holistically, connect strategy to execution, and push forward thinking solution was not only valuable but essential. I think it reinforced that this is what I always wanted to do, not just for one company, but for many. And that realization gave me the definitive push to fully commit to launching Aviaticus as a consulting practice.
That's got to be a great feeling. I bet. And just even you describing it to me, it sounds like one of those moments in a movie where something just clicks. The way that you described it, it almost feels like something must have just clicked for you at that time, and that sounds really amazing. And some of what you said kind of resonates with what you were saying earlier in terms of the analogy that you were making to aviation. So I want to talk about that. Let's talk about how using aviation principles in your consulting work at Aviaticus. How is it that a flight principle or cockpit challenges apply to consulting?
Yeah, it's really funny. I never thought that those two worlds have a potential to blend, but without pushing it, I think it's coming up pretty obvious for me. Well, I would say aviation is full of principles that directly apply to the business strategy. And I found that this mindset is one of the most actually valuable things I can bring to my consulting work. So let me share a few sort of key lessons from flying that I think directly translate to how you approach a problem solving and decision making in business. So first, and I mean, if you know, just to make sure that I can capture everything. So first, know your destination before you take off. Before every flight, so you need to know exactly where you are going, know your specific landing point. And I've had situation myself, but I took off thinking I'll figure out what I'm gonna go in the end. That approach introduces unnecessary risk because it forces you to juggle flight planning while actively piloting the aircraft. And the same is true in the business. Starting a major initiative without a clear end goal creates fast saturation. Leaders get overwhelmed managing the present while trying to define the future. So in my consulting work, I emphasize the importance of defining the desired end state upfront. Having that clarity reduces the risk and allows for more strategic decision making along the way. The second that I would mention is, always establish contingency plans. Right? As a pilot, part of the pre-flight planning involves identifying potential emergency landing sites. Not because you expect to use them, but because having options build confidence ensures that you are prepared for the unexpected. In business, the same principle applies. Every strategy needs building flexibility. Helps my clients create I help my client create contingency plans. So if conditions change, they have alternative paths forward instead of just scrambling in a crisis mode. Then 3, I would say anticipate challenges before they happen. Kind of goes with a second. So before I take off, I go through a mental checklist of all the things that could go wrong, and I prepare my actions or reactions in advance. That way, if an issue arises, I don't have to waste time figuring out a solution. I can act immediately. So in business, this proactive approach is critical. Whether it's anticipating potential risk in a technology implementation or foreseeing organizational resistance to change, I work with clients to develop response strategies ahead of time so they can react swiftly and effectively when the challenges arise. Now, the fourth part that I would like to mention is maintaining both a high level view and a focus on relevant details. So kind of like we say, strategic perspective with very specific level of detail. So when flying up in the cruising altitude, I have a very clear perspective of the entire landscape. Amazing feeling. Like I can see how close I am to my destination. I can spot for terrain ahead. I can track shifting weather patterns or remain clear of, restricted airspace, particularly if you're flying around. But at that time, at the time, I still remain, at the same time, I still remain very familiar with a specific ground details, because if I need to land, those details will become critical. So I always check the structure of the airports around me. So in case I know how I'm gonna land. So this balance between big picture awareness and attention to relevant details is, I think, what creates a safe life. And it's the same balance I apply in consulting. I help businesses develop that long-term strategic roadmap while ensuring they stay grounded in the operational details that matter to them. Too much focus on the big picture without execution leads to unrealistic plans, while too much focus on granular details without strategy will lead you to inefficiency. The key is integrating both perspectives effectively. So this aviation mindset, the clear goal setting, contingency planning, proactive response to demand, and balancing strategy with execution has been a guiding force in how I approach my work with clients. It's what allows businesses to operate with confidence, agility, and resilience in this ever changing landscape.
I must admit, it's the first time that I've heard of that analogy, but I couldn't agree with you more. It is dead on. In fact, it's so dead on. I'll tell you something funny about myself. When you were speaking, I mean, talking strategy and planning and organization, and processes. I used to start my presentations with a little person hugging a gear, saying that consultants, we love strategy, planning, and processes. So everything that you're saying is near and dear to my heart. So I appreciate that. And now I think that you've very much piqued our curiosity to see how you apply that in practice. Tell us about Aviaticus and the business challenges that you typically address. For example, what kinds of clients do you support, and what's the main value that they could gain from working with you?
Yeah. Good question. And this is something that I continue to evolve. I think initially when I put together sort of my website and my initial sort of scope for my consulting practice, I start seeing new areas that are popping up where I have at a great level of interest that can be combined with a certain level of expertise, and that sort of fit the pattern of helping customers and organizations with addressing complex transformation business challenges, in particular now using artificial intelligence or automation engineering. So in Aviaticus, we help organizations solve some of their most complex challenges at the intersection of data, technology, and business strategy. That's kind of how I would characterize it. And while every client has unique needs, the challenges we tackle often fall sort of into six core areas. First, I'll call this unifying data for smarter decisions. A lot of organizations struggle with data fragmentation, silos across business units, inconsistent reporting, and lack of integration between analytics, AI, and automation. So we help businesses establish structured, scalable data ecosystem that breaks down these silos, ensuring data is aligned with both the enterprise-wide objectives and localized business needs. of the different arms of the organization. A strong data foundation allows companies to make smarter, more informed decisions, and who will leverage AI and automation when they come to that point. Second area where we feel particularly strong is something that supports the first one, and that's data governance, compliance, and AI readiness. Many companies that I see and follow see governance as a compliance burden, but when done right, it really becomes your strategic advantage. So we design governance frameworks that ensure they're trustworthy, accessible, and secure, while also enabling AI-driven innovation. Whether it's aligning with GDPR or CCPA or implementing role-based access controls, we make governance an enabler rather than an obstacle. Third point, and I think that sort of touches on the marketing automation, and now it's really become the passion for this kind of seamless content management for omnichannel excellence. Omnichannel excellence or omnichannel marketing personalization is really critical capability that any organization that engages with customers it is critical to have. And content is one of the most valuable assets in an organization. Yet many companies struggle with structuring it, managing it, and distributing it effectively. So here we help businesses design kind of this integrated content ecosystem. And I'm thinking of the digital asset management, media asset management, content management platforms, the PIM, like the product information management, ensuring that content is centralized, structured, and is AI ready. I think this enables more efficient workflows, better personalization, and certainly seamless omnichannel experience. The fourth, that's an interesting one. I refer to it as bridging strategy, technology, and execution. One of the biggest challenges organizations face is aligning business strategy with the tech execution. So we use this enterprise capability modeling to create a shared language between business and technology, ensuring technology investments directly support business objectives. I think this approach enhances transparency, optimizes resource allocation, and makes decision making more strategic and scale. Fifth point, and that sort of goes back to where I've started with my career, and it's in revenue optimization and commercial strategy. And by the way, this doesn't apply only to hospitality or hotel. It can apply to any organization. But many organizations still operate with sort of this siloed decision making across revenue management, sales, marketing, and distribution that can often lead to missed opportunities. So here we help businesses integrate data-driven demand forecasting, competitive pricing strategy, and channel optimization to maximize profitability and drive the long-term growth. It's essentially bringing all those revenue management, demand generating functions together and operate as one team with one goal in mind. And the last, the sixth area that I would like to mention is I would refer to as this leading organizational change and transformation. We know that technology alone doesn't drive transformation. It's people and process that do. And we guide organizations to change by ensuring cross-functional alignment, setting realistic transformation roadmaps, and developing internal leadership capabilities. So our goal is to make transformation sustainable so businesses can execute and evolve long after external consultants step away. So at the core of Aviaticus is the structured yet flexible approach that's balancing the big picture strategy with sort of the operational execution. So we don't just offer recommendations. We partner with organizations to define a very clear path forward and help them navigate the complexity of transformation. So our clients range from large enterprises to mid-sized companies looking to scale, and the common thread among them is the need for clarity, alignment, and execution in this increasingly complex digital landscape. So that's kind of how I would summarize the key areas of our skill set and work capabilities.
And Martin, I'm really glad that you didn't leave out that last capability of organizational change management. I think one of the things that makes me a little bit sad many times is there just typically isn't budget for that. So when we go in and we do implementations, for example, ourselves, there's very, very limited to no budget many times when we develop a new solution or when we implement new processes or new technologies, or when we do a technology transformation, maybe a cloud migration or AI adoption, something to that effect. And I think that you're dead on in the sense that that is still a very big need for just the ecosystem. And I really do believe that, particularly, for example, with what's coming down the road with, or what's already here with AI, at least, it's something that is being neglected. I think that this is really much less of a technology play and much more of a transformational cultural change that needs to happen, which is covered perfectly within that last capability that you talked about. Now I'm going to try to put an analogy to you can let me know whether or not I get this right. So, your capabilities are up here, 30,000 foot view. Now we want to bring it back down to life to see if we can have the audience relate. So what analogy would I use there if I'm trying to say, okay, now you've got us at 30,000 feet. By the way, do you guys still fly at 30,000 feet? Does your plane fly at 30,000 feet, or is it 25? Which one is it?
Well, my plane can fly 17,500. That's the
Bungee.
yeah.
Okay.
I have
So it's the commercial ones, I guess, they go that high.
big birds. They do, yeah.
Birds.
And it flies level.
So bring us back down to ground level, Martin. Let's talk, obviously, without revealing any confidential client information, of course. Is there a specific Aviaticus project or use case that you could share with us?
I think so. I earlier touched on the content strategy and how this project came about, but maybe let me evaluate further on what made it such a transformational effort. So the challenge was that content was created, managed, and leveraged across multiple different teams without a unified strategy or clear alignment between the business function and technology. So my first step was to map out the full landscape, identifying every team involved in either content creation, distribution, or consumption, as well as every system that directly or indirectly interacted with content. And this was critical because content strategy isn't just about managing assets. It's about understanding how content flows through an organization and how different teams depend. So I spent a lot of time in listening, interviewing stakeholders across functions, and really carefully analyzing leadership perspectives so that I really get a full grasp and good understanding of their ambitions and their long-term vision. At the same time, I also looked and studied the industry trends, and particularly how automation and artificial intelligence play a role in content management. So to see how those emerging technologies could enhance efficiency and scalability. So from there, I kind of synthesized my findings, put them on a paper, organizing. So put my findings into structured white paper, capturing those insights, challenges, and some initial recommendations. So the next step was really about defining those essential business capabilities, the fundamental building blocks that need needed to be in place for the company to truly excel at content. So we run multiple workshops to align on the language and hierarchy of these business capabilities, ensuring that everyone was speaking the same language and working towards a shared vision. And the premise was simple. If all these capabilities were met, the organization would be best at content. So once we had that clarity, we started mapping out those capabilities to the existing technology landscape and identifying gaps, strengths, or potential redundancies. But this led to a deeper evaluation of technology of those different systems from both a business and technical fit perspective, resulting in what I would call a technology declaration, which is it's a clear framework outlining which business capabilities were supported by which technologies and where changes or enhancements were needed. At this point, we have pretty much clear picture of what needed to be done, but prioritization was key. So every initiative was run through a structured prioritization model where we sort of independently been assessing each idea against weighted set of criteria. The results were sometimes surprising, sometimes expected, but always grounded in a rational, objective approach that allowed us to build a roadmap based on real business value rather than subjective opinions. And finally, all those findings were brought together into a sort of a coherent, structured narrative that was socialized across multiple levels of the organization and ultimately presented to the leadership. And because strategy without execution is just a theory, for the most critical initiatives, we also provided all the detailed execution roadmap tailored to those real world constraints, ensuring that fast path to delivering the value. So this wasn't just really about defining strategy. It was about making sure it could be implemented effectively. So this project reinforced one of my core beliefs. And I think I mentioned before, true transformation happens when you connect the business strategy, technology, and execution in a structured and pragmatic way. And that's exactly what I focus on within Aviaticus. So helping organizations break through those complexities, align stakeholders, and build strategies that don't just sit in a document, but actually drive real measurable impact.
Thank you for that example, Martin. I love the point about this strategy wasn't simply a 50-page consultant's PowerPoint deck that will ultimately have no bearing or impact or practical impact on the organization. So I really love that you ended on that point. Martin, your journey offers so many valuable lessons for other leaders facing change. What are the 2, maybe 3 key pieces of information, these little pieces of nugget that you'd like to leave behind for professionals listening in, navigating their own version of the Great Reset?
Yeah. No, I think looking back at on my journey, I think there are probably 3 key lessons I would share with any leader facing a career crossroad or major transition. I think the first one would be strip away justifications to see the truth. So it's easy to for us to rationalize past decisions in a way that keeps us comfortable. Obviously, we want that. But real growth comes from looking at ourselves without those filters. So removing internal justification allows you to see your strength, gaps, and also true motivations, which is essential for making intentional choices about what comes next. Then second, kind of Mac PC analogy, define your own operating system. So your career isn't just about the title or industry. It's about this unique value that you bring. So instead of framing change around external roles. Focus on the core principles that define how you think, how you solve problems, and how you make them. And once you clarify your operating system, the right opportunities become much, much, much clearer. And I think the third, can't avoid just, navigate change like a pilot. I have this vision with adaptability and just aviation. You need clear destination before you take off. But you also need this set of contingency plans and the flexibility to adjust mid-flight. And having this long-term vision is critical, but staying adaptable ensures that you can make the best decisions as conditions evolve. So ultimately, major transitions aren't just about what's next. They are about finding success on your own terms and having the confidence to pursue it with clarity and purpose.
I think that there's one capability that you forgot to mention about Aviaticus, and that's business performance / life coach. That you could add to that now. I mean, there's way too many pearls of wisdom there. I was actually thinking to myself, I really got to get myself a notepad for this podcast. But then I realized, oh, wait a minute, I could listen to it later. It takes some notes later, so forget about that. Finally, Martin, you've generously offered others to connect. For listeners that are inspired by your story, who resonate with your Aviaticus aviation approach and who want to explore potential collaboration or just simply learn more, what's the best way for them to reach out to you and the Aviaticus team?
Well, I think the best way is, you connect through our website, aviatic.us. So together with the .us, it creates that Aviaticus name. But the website is aviatic.us. Where you can find more details on how we help organizations solve those challenges. There's also option to reach out directly through the site. But if you'd like to connect with me personally, absolutely feel free to connect on LinkedIn or email me directly at martin@aviatic.us. And I'll be delighted to discuss any aspect of this podcast, whether it's exploring a business opportunity or simply just exchanging perspectives on career transitions and strategy.
And Martin, we'll be sure to include all of that information on below in the description section of the podcast, along with any postings. We'll include that information on LinkedIn as well, so that people can be sure that they're able to connect with you when they want to. Martin, it's been an awesome conversation as always. It's always a great pleasure to catch up with you. I just wanted to personally thank you for sharing your journey. And as importantly, which we just don't see that level of transparency and authenticity, your emotions and the journey that you went through. I think that was just incredibly refreshing and even just a challenge for me to be more of that way as a leader, to the people in my organization. So, thank you very much for that. I'm sure that your story is going to inspire many of our listeners. So thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you, Marvin. I really appreciate this opportunity to share my story and perspectives on the business. You asked a lot of great questions, and I hope this conversation really resonates with listeners, maybe navigating, their own career transitions or tackling complex business challenges. If anything we discussed today sparked a thought or question, I'd love to continue the conversation. And I'm always open to exchanging ideas. So again, thank you for having me. It's been really fantastic discussion.
Hey, let's move the conversation over to LinkedIn. And on that note, we're signing off until our next episode. Stay data-centric and keep leading with purpose.